basically there would be, a set number of sanctional type competitions every season, and athletes can choose which ones they compete in. And depending on how you perform at each competition, your top, 3, 4, or 5 off-season or sanctional competitions that season earn you points, and then that's how you qualify for the CrossFit Games. So your points from those sanctionals, top 40 in the points at the end of that sanctional season qualify for the games. So I think that could be a really cool way to do it, but it would require basically a complete overhaul of the qualification system that we currently have.
A little bit of change. I'm going to give you 5 points, Aaliyah, because I like that it's kind of out there. Okay, Rob's getting warmed up. What do you think about this one, man?
I was taking notes. So this is something that I've thought a lot about. It's been tossed around a lot. I think what needs to happen is, with kind of what you guys were both just saying, and bring it all together. So I look at what we do in strongman, and I kind of look at it and be like, okay, how can we bring this to CrossFit? I'm not saying that strongman is by any means more popular than CrossFit, because it's not. But one thing they do really well is our qualification system for World's Strongest Man and how we get to that level. So I think having the CrossFit Games season, the open, quarterfinals, semifinals games is great. Having those other events outside of it is great. But what I think needs to happen is I am firmly on the pedestal that athletes do need to compete more. But in order to do that, we need to change what a CrossFit competition looks like. I don't think it's realistic for CrossFit athletes, for the expectation for them to be doing these multi-day competitions and expect them to be putting out great performances consistently. So to combat that, I look at what we do in strongman, and with our World's Strongest Man qualifying tour, we do competitions that are sold out arenas. They are 4 hours long. We have, anywhere from 12 to 15 athletes competing, and we do 5 events in 4 hours, crown a champion. There's a good prize purse. Winner goes to World's Strongest Man. I think what we do here with CrossFit is the winners of these events can go to semifinals. You don't get an automatic bid to the games, but you get to skip the first 2 portions of the CrossFit Games season. But what this does is it gets relevance kind of at the forefront of what we're doing in this sport, meaning our athletes are getting more face time on social media, on TV, and interacting with the fans. Because I think one of the big issues with CrossFit, and kind of why it loses its steam after the games, is because people forget that there are other events unless you're really in CrossFit. So if we can have these CrossFit events that our CrossFit Games athletes and our really well-known athletes are excited to compete at, there's good points, there's good money, there's an incentive for them to go to semifinals at least, so they can skip the first portion of the season. And it's not a big ask in terms of output physically, where they don't necessarily need to completely peak for it, but they can show up, throw down on 5 workouts in a short period of time, under the lights, in front of a sold-out arena, really hyped up. People get excited. It gets vendors in. And I think there's going to kind of address that ROI issue with semifinals, is because it's a shorter event, the expenditures aren't as big.
Rob, that sounds beautiful on paper. 6 points. But yeah, I was going to ask Tim and Aaliyah, is it realistic? Yeah. Tim, you were starting to talk. Go ahead.
I think you hit the nail on the head, honestly. I mean, if you the core of the CrossFit methodology, constantly varied, functional movements, high intensity being kind of the key word that everybody comes back to. And that's the reason it's successful in the affiliate. That's what a lot of competitive CrossFit is about being able to produce intensity and then being able to produce it over and over again. If we can change the standards so that it's not constantly varied functional movements at a high intensity until you die, which is basically what the games is. There's that element of it. If we can change the narrative a little bit to where we have these events where it's 4 hours, it's 20 athletes, and we're going to do 3 workouts, and the goal is not to crown the fittest. The goal is to have a well-balanced test that is, within reason, well-balanced, as much as you can balance it across 3 events. And I think that's perfect because, again, I could I could once a month show up and do 3 hard workouts over 4 hours on a weekend. I don't need to necessarily over peak because it's not too much volume. I don't need a ton of, volume adaptation. As long as I'm still training some intensity, I can show up and I can do that. So I couldn't agree more and love the idea that and also from a viewership perspective, golf is kind of doing the same thing where they're creating these events where you have a couple high level golfers that are high profile come together and they shoot on a simulator for a couple of hours, and people are going to love it because it's 4 hours. You buy a couple beers and you're out. It's like a football game. So you've kind of taken it from this giant, massive expenditure where I need to go somewhere for 4 or 5 days to watch this. It's like, no, it's just like an NFL event or a baseball game. I show up for 4 hours, I buy my tickets, I have fun, I go home. So I think there's a massive amount of value in something like that, but CrossFit needs to get behind it. And they need to make the decision on that point.
It's also the reason, and strongman, I can compete so often. When I first got into this CrossFit space and talking to Matt and O'Keefe and all those people at HWPO, they're like, how the hell do you compete 8 to 10 times a year? And it's because we have 3 really big competitions, and then throughout the entire season there are these other ones sprinkled in that are only one night. So it's I could train only 4 to 6 weeks for it, if that.